I said this is our last unit lesson on quadratic, so this is the last thing that we're doing, and it's kind of the culminating, everything's going to come together. It's the quadratic formula. It's the shortest lesson we're going to do because it's just a formula, and then we try some of them out. So there's not that much to it. The good thing with the quadratic formula is it can work for every single one that you have. You just need to know A, B, and C. Okay? So if you hate graphing, you don't have to graph. You can use the formula. If you aren't really sure how to use factoring, you can use the formula. All of that. That being said, for the test on Friday, you will have to show that you know how to use all the processes. But the quadratic formula, as you move forward, is great because it works for every single one. Okay? So completing the square is a strategy we've used. We've learned 5 different ones, but we're going to finalize with the quadratic formula today. So this is the quadratic formula. It is long. Okay? It's long, but it's not something you're going to need to memorize. I will give this to you on any test or quiz where you'll be expected to know it. Okay, so I will always give you the quadratic formula. You essentially just need to be able to identify A, B, and C. And in a quadratic, which one is always A? I don't want you all to say the first one. The one with the square. Why do I not want you to say the first one? Sometimes they're mixed up, right? So it's the one that goes with the x squared. Which one's always the B? The one with the just the x, it's the coefficient of just the x, and then the c is the constant, so just the number. What if there isn't a b or a c? What do you assume it is? Zero. Good. What if there's just an x squared? What do you assume a is? 1. Okay, so for instance, if your quadratic was this, your a would be 1. What would your b be? 0. And your c would be 5. Okay? So there is no b because there's no just plain x. So there isn't a b. There's not an a because it's not visible, but since there is a term, there's an invisible 1. And then your c is the 5 because that's the one that's by itself. So essentially the quadratic formula is just plug it in and see what you get. Okay? And again, just like yesterday, I'm not going to simplify square roots. I'm going to leave them in the radical because I think that makes it less work. If you like decimals, go ahead and do it on a calculator. If you don't care, leave it as a square root. So let's do this one using the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, which in this case would be what? 0. Do we put negative 0? No, it's just 0. 0 plus or minus square root, what's b again? 0 squared minus 4 times what's a? 1 times what's c? 5. All of that in a square root, and all of that on top of 2 times what's a? 1. Okay, that's it. I mean, that's not a way to do it, but that's your first step. Plug in the numbers that you know. And you should always have 3. Even if it's only 2 terms, if you're missing some of them are a 0. So where do I start then when I'm simplifying this equation?
Start in the numerator.
Start in the numerator. Do everything on top first and then deal with the stuff on the bottom. So let's look at the top. This is going to stay 0, plus or minus square root. You've got options here. I typically do this stuff all first. And then I don't do this mentally. If you want to try to do it mentally, you can. I suggest starting by not doing it mentally. What's 0 squared? 0 minus, what's 4 times 1? Times 5? 20. Okay, so I will write that out. And then what's 2 times 1? 2. Okay. So then x equals, do I need this 0 here? No, I don't. So it's just plus or minus, what's 0 minus 20? Negative 20 over what? Over 2. That's going to be over 2 when the 4 comes back. Okay, that will be over 2. But I'm looking at that right now, and I already know what my answer is. How do I know what my answer is? It's got a negative in the square root, which means what? There's no solution. Okay, so there's a negative in the square root, which means there's no solution. So your answer to this would be no solution. Patience. Alright, maybe we're back. Alright, over 2, and this is no solution because of this negative. Alright, so there's a negative. So that's your answer, no solution. Alright, so quadratic formula, you do not have to memorize it, alright, which should take the stress out of it, because you have nothing to memorize. You will need to at some point in life, like probably Algebra 2, need to memorize it. I'm not going to ask you guys to, alright, I just want you to be able to use it. So really, this is about simplifying. This is as basic as Algebra gets. It's simplifying as much as you can. Order of operations still goes, which is why you have to do what first? Parentheses if there are any. We use the parentheses for multiplication, but that doesn't really mean parentheses. What comes next? Exponents, so you do the second power first. Alright, and then you just go from there. Do everything on top, do everything on the bottom, and then at the end, move up. Okay, so that's the quadratic formula. Let's try another one. I always start by identifying A, B, and C, so what's A? Not 2x squared, just 2. Alright, what's B? 10. And what's C? Negative 5. C is negative 5. Good catch, whoever said that. So it's a negative 5. Why is it not 2x squared? Because A is just the what? The coefficient, the number in front. It's just the coefficient. So all we're going to do is plug that into my formula. So we start with negative B, which would be what? Negative 10 plus or minus, and I'm going to put a long square root, and I've got B squared, which would be what squared? 10 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. All of this over what? 2 times 2. All right, so you've plugged it in. Now it's just about where do we start. So what's the first thing that we do?
Negative 4 times 2.
Before negative 4 times 2. 10 squared, which is 100. What's negative 4 times 2?
Negative 8.
Negative 8 times negative 5. Positive 40. All of that over 2 times 2, which is what? 4. Good. All right, what else can I simplify? Yeah, what's 100 plus 40? 140 over 4. Can I do anything else? Do you know the square root of 140? No? So that's it. You're done. There's nothing else to do. 140 is not a perfect square. So we are done there. If this had been 144, what would that be? 12. So then you could keep going. Okay? But as it is, leave it alone. Why can't I do 10 divided by 4? Do you have a question?
Yes.
Go ahead. Okay. All right. Why can't we just do 10 divided by 4 and at least simplify these? What's the 4 underneath? The whole thing, which means it's not just 10 divided by 4, it's also this divided by 4. So you could either do both of those or just leave it. Like leave it right here. This is as simplified as I'm going to ask it to be. Okay? Now, how many answers are there here?
2.
There are 2. Why?
Because
Positive or negative. So this could be negative 10 plus square root of 140 over 4, or it could be negative 10 minus 140 over 4. You don't need to write these 2 answers out. You just need to know that this means there's how many answers? 2. Whenever there's a plus minus sign, it means there's 2. Okay, Brendan.
why 4 in the equation?
It just because that's the equation. Like, why is there a 4 there? Because that's the how it works.
Is it something like on the graph? Doesn't.
It's not necessarily somewhere on the graph. It's just that's what the relationship is between A, B, and C. Remember how we said in a perfect square trinomial there's a relationship between B and C? B divided by 2 squared gives you C. So somebody figured out that this quadratic formula right here is this sums up the relationship between B and C for all of them. Okay, so that's your answer here. Okay, so what about here? Let's try one more all together. What about here? A is not 2.
A is 1.
A is 1. How come?
Because
X squared.
Okay.
X squared doesn't have anything in front of it, so you're still getting 1.
Good.
Does it have to be in standard form?
Ah, good question. Does it have to be in standard form? Yes. I said yesterday the only time it doesn't have to be in standard form is when you are completing the square. Every other time it has to be in standard form, which means it needs to be equal to what?
0.
0. So then I need to move which one? 2x. And if I move that over here, it becomes negative. So we get x squared minus 2x minus 3. So then what's my b? Good. And then my c? Very good. Perfect. Okay, so it has to be in standard form. So the only time it doesn't have to be, in fact it cannot be, is if you are completing the square. Every other thing that we do has to be equal to 0. Alright, so plug it in. What's the opposite of b? Negative b. Positive 2. So x equals 2 plus or minus square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3. Good. And then over all of that over 2 times 1. Good. All right, what can we simplify first here? 2. What is negative 2 squared? 4. Good. 4 minus, what's 4 times 1? Negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3. Positive or negative 12? Positive 12. All of that over what's 2 times 1? 2. All right, now this one, x equals 2 plus or minus square root of what's 4 plus 12? 16. Very good. Over 2. So are we done here? We were done here last time, but we're not done here this time. Why not? 16 is a perfect square, so what can I do with it? Square root it. So then it becomes 2 plus or minus what? 4 over 2. And we're still not done because we can do this. So what's 2 plus 4? 6 over 2. Or, and what's 2 minus 4? Negative 2 over 2. So then, Brendan, this equals 3 or negative 1. Great work. Good job. Okay, so is this formula easy? No. Are there lots of spots you can make mistakes? Absolutely. But what's the perk of the quadratic formula? What's the perk of it compared to the other ways? Brendan?
The perk of the quadratic formula is that
There's only one way of doing it, right? It's the same every single time, okay? And it works every time, all right? So on graphing, sometimes it's hard, because you remember when we graphed some of them, and yours didn't touch the x-axis, so you had to put imaginary lines and figure out where it would touch the x-axis, and then it wasn't like, is that a perfect way of doing it? No, probably not. So sometimes graphing isn't perfect. Sometimes factoring is really hard, because you get long quadratic trinomials that have big numbers in front of them, and you've got to try 16 different things out, and that is annoying, and that can take a long time. So that can be a challenge, which makes factoring difficult. Quadratic formula will work every single time. Is it a long formula? Yeah. Is it going to be this many steps every time? Yeah. So if that's daunting to you, you might hate it. All right, but I guarantee you by more practice, it doesn't take as long as some of the other ones. All right, so just to sum up, these are the ways that we've talked about. We've talked about graphing, factoring, completing the square, and quadratic function. I'm also going to put in here square roots, because that's kind of part of completing the square. But we talked about that too, where it's like x squared equals 81, because that's really important, because that gets you to what? When you do this, x equals what? What? What?
9.
You're almost right. Thank you. When we talked about square roots, what did we learn about?
Oh, positive or
That positive or negative. And that's huge, right? Because that's how you get the two answer choices. So that's why with quadratics, why do they always have two answer choices?
So they can go either way.
Because it goes on the axis either way, right? A parabola touches the axis twice. If it doesn't have two answer choices, that's because the vertex is on the parabola, or it's no solution, because sometimes what happens? Sometimes what happens with our parabola, why is it no solution sometimes? It never touches the x-axis, so it's either above the x-axis or below. Brendan?
So it's 5.
There's 5 ways. Yeah. So we've done 5 ways. This is the last one that we did just right now. All right?
Will we need to do all 5 of
You will
these?
need to do all 5 on the test. This one is just kind of part of, yeah, I mean, it's just part of completing the square. So it's not really a different way, but there will be some simple ones like this. Okay? I think, yeah, that's probably the easiest, but that's because your quadratics will be simpler there. Okay. Any questions on quadratics?